Tänään hän puhuu meille otsikolla Innovating towards a smarter future. Please welcome Mr. Bruce Oreck.
Happy to have you here. Welcome.
Well, let's talk about the weather. What do you think about the weather? You know, I came to Finland 8 years ago, and the expression you always heard was, there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing. 8 years later, I've come to believe that there is in fact such thing as bad weather. Okay, here we are. Let's see if this works. So we have two themes here, health and fitness and the future. Now you probably think that we came to talk about this good stuff, right? Health, fitness. This is just my excuse to put up some pictures of myself from my competition days, right? That the bottom is me now and the top is when I was competing. The good news is we're not talking about this. But rather we're going to talk about declining health in an urban world. So what I'm going to really ask you to do today is to sort of be willing to think differently about this, go on a journey with me. I'm going to take you pretty far out before I bring you back in to orbit. And I'm going to ask you to consider health in an entirely different way. Declining health and an urban world. Urbanization. If you follow the lines, you can see that we've gone from a planet where people were living in the countryside to a planet where basically almost everyone is going to be living in a city. 100 years ago, 7 out of 10 people lived in the countryside. Today, on average around the globe, 7 out of 10 people live in a city, and the trend continues. And if you look at this next, you'll see that 180,000 people every day move from the countryside into a city. Every single day around the planet, 180,000 people make that move. It's a tremendous shift. By 2030, 9% of the world's population will be living in just 41 cities. Cities with 10 million or more inhabitants. It's an unbelievable shift. And basically, you can see how it looks as you come through. This is through 2020, the red being megacities. This is a fundamental shift in how we live in the world. And you have to accept the fact that we're living in an urban environment changes everything about our health. And on top of that, we're now going to go through this journey of technology. So, first of all, in case you are interested, why, and you may not be, but I'm always in Finland and people are always asking me to give them more data, more facts. There's a lot of books out there on why people come to the city. Even though in Finland you have so much countryside and everyone loves going out to be in nature, the fact of the matter is the trend is unstoppable at this point. People are abandoning small towns. You know, like in America, cities are just in the countryside, towns are emptying out. And there's a lot written about why that is if you want to know more. But along with this urbanization, you need to accept the fact there's a fundamental demographic change going on. And these affect health patterns. The baby boomers, that's me. This is the USA. In 2020, baby boomers, my generation, 72% of us are white, non-Hispanic, and the rest are other, various different races and nationalities, that sort of thing. But 72% white, the baby boomer generation. Now let's shift to the millennials. That's the people who are basically were 35 and under. Look at that. It's dropped to 54%. And in this multicultural 46%, you have entirely different ways that they relate to health, to food, to exercise. Not wrong, just different. And in this shift, your health objectives are going to change. Now, Finland obviously is a much more of a homogeneous population, overwhelmingly white Lutheran. But the impacts of multiculturalism around the globe are going to impact your healthcare here. This slide, by the way, also, the only mention I'm going to make of this slide also explains Donald Trump. Why? Because the people that Donald Trump appeals to are the ones who grew up in a world that was overwhelmingly white, male-dominated, and simply don't know how to handle a world that's not. And for the historical record, I worked for the old guy. I don't work for the new guy. I don't like the new guy. Okay, that's important. Urban lifestyle and work are completely different. I know we're here talking about health, but you really have to get the big picture. Urban lifestyle and work are different than they have ever been. E-commerce. Now, why the hell are we talking about e-commerce? There is a 20% tipping point when a business, we've determined this from looking backwards on e-commerce, when any aspect of commerce, which can be converted to an e-commerce, when it hits about 20%, it tips. If you look at before 2006, basically this was just primarily books. The bookstore, the traditional bookstore in red, continued to, carry more weight than Amazon did. But as soon as it hit 20%, look what happened. And that's important for health. So, e-com, that's the retail tipping point. Today in the United States, 63% of all the US households belong to Amazon Prime. 63%. That's an astounding number. That's like 170 million, 180 million people. A single store. Why is that important for health? Because I no longer have to get off my behind. I don't have to get off the couch. All I have to do is sit there and push a button, and the world of stuff comes to me. And we're confronting a global obesity challenge, including here in Finland, because people are exercising less. And one of the reasons they exercise less is because they don't even have to go to the store. They literally don't even have to go to the store. They can sit at home and push a button, and stuff comes to them. And do I know that that's happening? Absolutely, because e-commerce sales are through the roof. These are in US dollars. Look what's going. Look at the rate of growth. That's by 2021, 4.4, almost $4.5 trillion of the entire US economy will be done on e-commerce. Our total economy is only 17 trillion. And this is retail, which means basically the overwhelming majority of retail will be done by people staying at home, sitting on their chairs, and pushing buttons. Which tells you that there's a tremendous pull away from going out, walking, exercising. This issue of lack of mobility, physical mobility, is going to get worse. This is not a direct conversation about the health care and how you treat morbidity in weight, but rather that I'm asking you to think way beyond the traditional boundaries that you do when you're talking about healthcare. There are huge factors at play here which are really going to overwhelm a lot of the traditional approaches to keeping people healthy. And believe it or not, this is one. And just in case you happen to think that Finland is insulated from this, that it won't happen here, let me show you that you're wrong. As we speak, Amazon is finishing a distribution center in Poland intended to service the Nordics. So people in Finland will be able to go online, clickety-click with their phone or their pad or their laptop, order goods, and have it here in Finland in a day or two, probably even in Finnish from Amazon. Right now there's a distribution center in the UK and one in Germany, much farther away. They're bringing it here. There's a tsunami is coming. And it's going to have, forget about the real estate issues and the business issues, just from a health standpoint, the fact that people like to stay at home and push buttons instead of going out tells you that there's going to be health implications. Then there's this one. We're putting more people in the city, taking them out of the countryside, taking them away from nature, sticking them in buildings and in work situations. These are US numbers, right? Basically what you have is loss of performance, cost, productivity, an annual cost in the US of $300 billion because of workplace stress and sickness. $300 billion, by the way, is larger than the total gross domestic product of the entire nation of Finland. That's the losses in the US from workplace stress and sickness. And remember, in an urbanizing world where you have people coming in, there's more and more of this stick them in an office building. And although this is beyond the reach of today's talk, there's a tremendous amount of science about why that makes people sick. And it's not because the air is per se bad, because you have certainly good ventilation, but rather it's because we're sticking ourselves effectively in artificial boxes with artificial light that has nothing to do with our biology. We're there all day long, every day, and then we're surprised that we're not healthy. There's study after study that talks about artificial light and how that impacts our health. Think about if you go to a shopping center, it's lit the same whether it's 8 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock at night. The body's circadian rhythm is completely thrown off. Same thing with your home lighting. Same thing with your device lighting. You're looking at screens until you go to bed. So your whole sleep cycle is off. The body's ability to repair itself and rest itself is completely off. You've got no connection to the cycle of the seasons because you're living in a box, some concrete box with a couple of windows, you're sitting at a desk, right? And the numbers are getting worse. 30% of workers report extreme stress levels from being stuck in boxes. 60 to 80% of all accidents caused by the same thing. So on and so forth. The numbers are overwhelming, and they're going to get worse because we're urbanizing. When you go on your summer vacation, my guess is this is not what you have in mind. When you head out to your cottages and you want to go be in the woods and collect berries or mushrooms or sit by the water, this is not what you have in mind. Yet this is, in fact, the state of affairs for most people. An environment which is completely contrary to physical and mental health. And it's going to get worse. 180,000 people a day moving into cities and moving away from the country, being stuck into office buildings. And then there's this problem. Let me say this, As an American, I've got to do a big mea culpa. I think America has done more to destroy the health of the human species than any other country with this engineered food that we love the taste of, which is basically poisoning us. Over 60% obesity in the US, and we are not the fattest country anymore. Over 30% morbid obesity, health-threatening obesity. And if you look at the figures in Finland, you're not actually much different. Mexico used to be a country full of people who were very thin and lean. They ate a very natural, low-processed diet, beans, rice, vegetables. Today, they're the fattest country in the world, drinking soda pop and eating fast food, and all of the health consequences that come with that. This dining out reality is becoming more prevalent. Why? Because the millennials, who now represent over 50% of the workforce in the US and soon here too, and will soon be 75% of the workforce. We're done, I'm a dinosaur. They don't cook at home. They eat out more frequently than any other generation in the past. You need to understand this. They're eating out more. In fact, if you look at apartment buildings in the United States today that are built for millennials, apartments, they have kitchens that look about the size of a TV screen. It's got a sink and a microwave and a tiny little refrigerator. They couldn't cook in there if they had to. They can barely make a cup of coffee. It's all about going out and eating someplace. And restaurants are going to serve food that are full of butter, or fats, salts, fast foods, all this stuff. This is the trend. And you've got to look at the trends beyond medicine to understand the challenge. This, of course, leads to the march of diabetes. Look at the growth between, right? This is between 1980 and 2014. And this number is set to almost, to go up by another 50% within just a few years. These are overwhelming numbers. Within a few years, 1 billion people on the planet will suffer from diabetes. And you can see Finland. Now, Finland has a genetic predisposition to diabetes, but it's also diet-related. And the numbers are just crushing. Soon, by the way, I didn't put that slide up, soon, the global cost to treat diabetes will approach $1 trillion a year. That's not the cost of lost productivity, the cost of the indirects to the economy. That is the direct healthcare cost on a global basis will soon approach $1 trillion a year for a self-induced illness. So the question is, if this is the reality, what do you do? What do you do? Before I step to that phase, though, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. It is not the way it used to be. How many of you all have a smartphone? Okay, anybody not have a smartphone? Anybody? Okay, 10 years ago, they didn't exist, right? This is the iPhone 10. This is the X, the X version, the one that just came out. This is the 10th anniversary edition. If you want later, you can touch it. It's got the nice full screen LED, OLED. Really. But the point is, you didn't have it 10 years ago, but now everyone's got one. And if you ask a millennial, you survey them, 90% will tell you they never go anywhere without it. It never leaves their side. Over 80% say it's the first thing that they check in the morning. Hi, honey, how'd you sleep? To the phone. And it's the last thing they check at night. They check their social media once every 7 minutes. because God knows something might happen to that picture of potatoes they just posted. What that tells you is their relationship to the electronic reality is completely different than mine was certainly growing up. They stay inside to play games on computers. They don't go outside. As I mentioned before, they don't go out to shop. They don't go out to meet. Or if they do, they sit there and they do this. And the use of the electronics has two effects. One is certainly the light coming off of our screens completely disrupts your circadian cycle. Rest, ability to sleep goes down, that fails, that brings on other illness, and that's going to get worse, not better. The other thing is, and the science is pretty hard on this, and that is if you use these things, the effect on the brain is very much the same as taking drugs, addictive drugs. It's very hard to get away from this. So you've now got a generation of humans, billions of people who are effectively in something similar to a drug-induced state with their electronics, all of which has health consequences. And yet people are not thinking about it that way. They go, well, just give them a flu shot. There's a bigger challenge than that, much bigger. So how do you respond to a new reality? And you just got to accept that it is actually very different. Before the truth can set you free, you need to recognize which false belief is holding you hostage. If we're going to step beyond where we are, we first got to let go of what we think is reality, of what we think is. And to do this, I want to invoke the help of three people. Sir Isaac Newton, a guy named Arthur C. Clarke, and Albert Einstein. Somewhat disparate characters from basically different time frames, but let's start with the Apple guy. Not this Apple guy, that Apple guy. You remember, Sir Isaac Newton was the founder of basically the modern physics, and the story is told that he's sitting under an apple tree one day, and an apple falls and hits him, and it makes him start thinking about gravity. Something like this. Oh, come on, give me a break. And with the fall of the apple, and he begins to think about gravity, this is what he concludes. He says something that's extremely important and relevant to the conversation we're having right now. And he said this: you're educated, come on, we can do Latin together, can't we? Probably didn't know that Isaac Newton wrote the Principia in Latin, but he did. And this is what he said. He said, an object at rest stays at rest, and an object in motion stays in motion with the same speed and the same direction unless acted upon by an unbalanced force. Now you're thinking to yourself, okay, Bruce has finally lost it. What in hell does one of the fundamental principles of physics have to do with health care? Well, let's translate that into something different. It's called inertia. And although in this case we're not talking about physical inertia of an object in motion or an object in rest, we are certainly objects that are subject to the same rules of inertia, meaning we keep doing what we are already doing. And when we try to fix a problem, we do it in a framing that says, I can keep doing what I'm going to do. I keep doing what I've been doing. And then, of course, we're kind of surprised when it doesn't work. But this is a challenge, because so much of what the healthcare industry and the healthcare systems are designed around is what we've already been doing. Yeah, sure, you got a new drug or a new surgical procedure, but it doesn't take into account the fact that the world has radically changed, and yet we're stuck with inertia. And that brings me to this fellow, Arthur C. Clarke. Arthur C. Clarke was British. You may know him because he was a science fiction writer, but he was also a futurist. He wrote 2001: A Space Odyssey, probably his best known work, but he was a futurist. He was someone who was basically able to stand back and look at the future and make an analysis. So I'm now going to show you a video clip, and hopefully the sound works. Let me set this up for you. It's an old clip. The clip was filmed in 1964, so that's 54 years ago. It was filmed at the New York World's Fair, which I attended. Don't ask how old I am. And he's asked to make predictions about the future. And again, it's an old audio video clip, so I'm going to give you a little of his answer. And he says, look, predicting the future is very difficult because if you predict conservatively and therefore things happen that you've predicted that everyone kind of understood, you look stupid because you couldn't see the future. But if you predict stuff that seems like science fiction, people will think you're crazy. So he's going to make two predictions in this. So let's see if the sound comes up on this.
Trying to predict the future is a discouraging and hazardous occupation because the prophet invariably falls between two stools. If his predictions sound at all reasonable, you can be quite sure that in 20 or at most 50 years, the progress of science and technology has made him seem ridiculously conservative. On the other hand, if by some miracle a prophet could describe the future exactly as it was going to take place, his predictions would sound so absurd, so far-fetched, that everybody would laugh him to scorn. Let's start by looking at the city of the future. Some people think that it will be like this. And they're quite right. In fact, everything you see now already exists. All the materials, all the ideas, these things could be put into practice immediately. But what about the city of the day after tomorrow? Say the year 2000. I think it will be completely different. In fact, it may not even exist at all. I'm thinking of the incredible breakthrough which has been made possible by developments in communications. These things will make possible a world in which we can be in instant contact with each other, wherever we may be, where we can contact our friends anywhere on earth, even if we don't know their actual physical location. It will be possible in that age, perhaps only 50 years from now, for a man to conduct his business from Tahiti or Bali just as well as he could from London. I am perfectly serious when I suggest that one day we may have brain surgeons in Edinburgh operating on patients in New Zealand.
Wow. So let's go through what he predicted and what he got right and what he got wrong. The images you saw of a city of the future was actually the model of the city of the future in the General Motors Pavilion in the 1964 New York World's Fair. And he says, some people think the city will look like this. And he concludes, of course it will, because all of this technology already exists. And he is 100% wrong. Because the city looks exactly the same as it did 50 years ago. Oh, sure, you've got a few new buildings, but basically the city is exactly the same. The street lights, the streets, transportation, offices, homes, nothing's changed. Nothing has changed. There's not a reinvention of the city. Then he makes two other predictions. He says the city of tomorrow may not even exist. Now, he's not talking about nuclear war, but he says, first prediction, he says, look, I know this sounds crazy, but we'll be able to talk to each other no matter where we are on the planet, not knowing where we are. Remember, none of the technology existed. None of the science behind this existed, just the idea. He said, as crazy as it sounds, a doctor in New Zealand could do a surgery in London. And of course, all of that came true. Within half a century, basically actually within 40 years, you have the cellular communications. We don't think anything about picking up the phone. We don't worry where somebody is or where we are. We just expect to talk to them instantly. Do a Skype call, a video call, a FaceTime call. Doctors are doing surgeries and interviews and dealing with patients and such from across the globe. He's completely right on that one. But attendant as part of that prediction, he said, well, the city may not even exist anymore because people do not need to be together, right? They can be anywhere. But that one is also wrong. So he gets 2 wrongs and 1 right. Now, what he got right was the prediction about things that did not yet exist. There was no cellular technologies, no phones, none of this stuff. Why did he get it right? Well, for 2 reasons. First of all, because he was a very smart guy. But second, because there was no inertia. There was no already doing to hold you back. Because we were starting with a blank piece of paper, because as humans we are creative and inventive and created and invented something altogether new. There was no inertia to hold us back. What he got wrong was the prediction about how the city would look and whether the city would still exist. Not only does the city look the same, but now there are more people than ever in a city. Why? Because of inertia. Because we keep doing what we're doing because we keep thinking the same way about what already exists. We're drawn like moths to the flame, to the patterns that exist, to the inertia. And this is hurting us when it comes to healthcare. Really hurting us. What happened is basically you keep on doing what you're doing. And doing what you're doing isn't going to work. Because it's not working now, and doing more of it's not going to work in the future. Because everything else has changed. Which brings me to this guy. In every presentation, I try to put up a photograph of Albert Einstein. Not because he necessarily has anything to do with what I'm talking about, because he had the best hair in history. And I'm jealous. By the way, this is proof. Albert Einstein is proof that there's no justice in the universe. The smartest guy in history has also got the best hair in history. How is that fair? Einstein said this. Einstein said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. He actually said that. That's the definition of insanity. And that is exactly what we are doing in our healthcare systems. We try to fix the same problem over and over, whether it's drug abuse or obesity or diet. We're not dealing with the problems as they are. We're dealing with the problems as they may have once been or in the patterns in our mind that we think that they are. And what does that make us? Right? Crazy. We are all effectively acting in an insane manner because we are attempting to address the healthcare challenges of the 21st century based on thinking and modalities and physical realities of the 20th century and the 19th century, and we're not there. And no matter how hard you work, and no matter how dedicated you are to solving these challenges, no matter how smart you are, you're not going to get on the right side of the curve to the solution, to providing meaningful healthcare solutions to your population if we don't do it differently. Hang on, we're almost there. Right? So this is your job. The real challenge about healthcare in the future is the future, which is different than the past. If you really, really want to figure out how you're going to take on the challenges of obesity, stress from the workplace, diabetes, all of the things that come that we know exist and the other ones that are going to come as we continue to create more and more dense urban environments with fewer and fewer relationships to the natural world, more artificial light, more this, more that, more noise. You're going to have to stop being in the fishbowl you're in and find a new fishbowl to think in. Because if you can't do this, the best we can say, no matter how passionate you are, is that you're just going to be putting Band-Aids on the problem. And I don't think there's anybody here who thinks that a Band-Aid is a solution to the healthcare challenges that you all have undertaken as your life jobs, as your commitments. So whatever you decide, it has to be bold, you have to take risks, and if you don't, you won't win, you'll fail. If you keep doing what we have been doing, no matter how well located your mind, your heart, your intentions, it is not going to work. That's the point of the conversation today. It is different. And yet I see over and over and over again people coming to the challenges of the 21st century in health with a 20th century, 19th century, even 18th century approach. There's no great punchline here, other than it's time for you all, as leaders, to demand that we look at our health in a different way. Because if you all don't lead, if you all don't take the responsibility to actually lead us away from where we found ourselves, it's not going to get better. And the one thing I know is from the people looking here and people I've talked to in the healthcare industry, the one thing you all are truly committed to is making the world better. So now the challenge is really on your shoulders. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Mr. Oreck.
This is the point where they go, why did we ask him to come here?
Well, I'm going to ask you some questions.
Sure.
And the first one is personal.
Sure.
You talk about the work stress.
Yeah.
How do you reduce your work stress? Or do you ever get stressed and then you lay down on a sofa and eat some potato chips and the Kentucky Fried Chicken and do as you
So the first trick is that to hide the stress, I dye my hair.
Okay, I can see it.
You can see that, right? Yeah. No, I mean not everybody reacts to stress the same way. Some people actually thrive in more stress. For me, what I like to do is to shift from being stressful about it to thinking, am I in a creative space? Am I doing something that's creative? And as long as my brain is convinced that I'm being creative instead of stressful, I stay healthier. I don't get sick. I rarely get sick. And I don't sleep much either, so I'm a bad example.
Yeah, that's good. Bad example.
Well, as you know, we are celebrating our 100th year of independence.
Oh, no.
Independence, hopefully, not you, but what do you see as for next, I wouldn't say 100 years, but 20 years, the challenges and the strength for Finland?
I think Finland is positioned in actually a tremendously good position in a complicated world for a lot of reasons. First of all, Finns are people who have the ability to hold on to big ideas, commit to long-term solutions, and have a really good sense of values. Those are hard things to come by. I mean that. I'm not being nice. I think that's absolutely true. But at the same time, there is this passion to hold on to the past. Oh, we used to do it this way. Let's figure out how to do it. This is Finland's biggest challenge and biggest opportunity. If Finland would ever stop holding on to the past long enough to grab a hold of the future, right? The rocket ship would take off because it's full of smart, creative people, with their heart and minds in the right alignment. And so, this is the big challenge. What interests me is why does Finland, which has all the parts of the puzzle, refuse to let go of the old stuff?
And talking about innovations, what kind of health innovation do you think that we would need for the for the
What kind of
future?
innovations?
Yes.
I think the biggest innovation is coming to the problems with a different mind. If you, for example, let's just look at the challenge of obesity. You're not going to solve that by putting people on diets. If that worked, everybody would be thin, right? But there are more diet books in the bookstore than anything else, and yet people get heavier and heavier. How are you going to address that differently? Instead of coming to saying, well, we're going to staple your stomach or put you on a diet, or you can't have this. There are solutions out there, but they require stepping back and seeing the problem differently. And again, this is to place to one of Finland's strengths. Finland holds himself out saying, hey, we're problem solvers. Okay, solve the problem. But to solve this problem, you got to stop thinking about it the way everybody else is thinking about it, because that doesn't work.
So I would say that this is what Yksi elämä is about, thinking differently.
That's right.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Anyway, sure. My pleasure.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.